My reading buddy today is the Queen of Hearts, because she's crying, and so am I, because I'm very disappointed. We are starting 2025 strong with sadness, sorrow, and spoilers for Jennifer Saint's Atalanta. Before we start, by no means am I trying to imply throughout this video, although I'm going to be very emotional, that this is a bad book and that it's not worth your time and attention, and then there is no audience for it. I do understand why Jennifer Saint's prose is loved by many, but I myself feel like I've been lied to, and I have so much to say, or rather to rant emotionally, about how Atalanta was a promise that was never fulfilled. Before I get into the spoilery section of the video, which is going to be extra long because we're gonna dissect every single major and minor plot point of this book, let me tell you who I think Atalanta would work wonderfully for. If you like ancient Greek retellings, obviously, if you like your female main characters to be introspective, introverted, more focused on themselves rather than the outside world, if you prefer a character who's not afraid to confront her desires, fears, her newly fleshed out emotions, and to assess them at least somewhat realistically, if you like your characters to be more mature and not have the over-the-top exaggerated emotional response to whatever's happening in their life the way certain YA teenage girlies do, which no shade on them whatsoever, that's exactly how we process our life when we are teenagers. But if you're kind of over that and you want your characters to be slightly more mature, then I suppose you would enjoy this book more. The action takes place against an ancient Greek backdrop, which means gorgeous scenery, beautiful ancient ruined temples, gods and goddesses prancing through the woods, the smell of sea salt in the air, the cry of seagulls, and a lot of beautiful, breathtakingly beautiful imagery that I myself enjoyed very much while reading the book. Is it spicy? No, it's not. It's not even a romance book in and of itself. If you're looking for a great love story with a happy end, that you might want to look elsewhere. Atalanta is much more focused on her main character, the way she grows, the way she develops, the way she learns to confront her emotions, her desires, her fears, the way she rationalizes how she was brought up and whether that aligns with what she truly wants from her life for herself or not. The couple of emotional, romantic scenes that are included in the book have the vibe of a pre-Raphaelite painting rather than something spicy. So if you're not a spice lover, good news for you. You will not find that in this book. Neither would you find excessive characterization. Sorry, I promised I was not going to be bitchy in this section. I'm trying. I'm in a very difficult situation right now because I'm trying to sell you this book as an introspective analysis of the main character's inner journey, of the transformations that the hero goes through. And in my opinion, these transformations made no particular sense and were not compatible with basic human psychology. If we presume for a second that the plot of this book makes logical sense, then the ending is in line with these particular characters and how they live their lives and what they wanted for themselves. I am satisfied with the fact that this is not a happily ever after that just, well, it would not be even possible in this particular setting, but I'm also happy and relieved that Jennifer Saint is not one of those super edgy authors who'd make their characters go through hell and back and then give them an unexpected, abrupt, tremendous, torturous ending just for the sake of shock value. This doesn't do that, so props to the author for maintaining the balance. I do think Atalanta has considerable literary merit, and I do think that there's a wide audience who would really enjoy this book. If you still plan to read Atalanta, then this is your cue to click off the video and go have the time of your life. Enough glazing, let's get into me complaining. So first of all, let me read you the synopsis. When a daughter is born to the king of Arcadia, she brings only disappointment. Left exposed on a mountainside, the defenseless infant Atalanta is left to the mercy of a passing mother bear and raised alongside the cubs under the protective eye of the goddess Artemis. Swearing that she will prove her worth alongside the famed heroes of Greece, Atalanta leaves her forest to join Jason's band of Argonauts. But can she carve out her own place in the legends in a world made for man? Praise for Jennifer Saint, a spirited retelling, beautiful and absorbing, a vivid reimagining of Greek mythology. Jennifer Saint has done an incredible job, at confusing both me and her main character. The synopsis clearly tells us that this is going to be an adventure story. This is going to be a quest that our main character embarks on for a variety of purposes, the main of which is to bring glory to the goddess whom she reveres. We have stories about women who prove their worth and carve their own paths in their lives using magic, which was seen as a purely female type of weaponry. Obviously, men are strong, they have weapons and swords and spears, and they can protect themselves, and they have the societal encouragement to demonstrate their aggression and their physical prowess, while women don't necessarily have this. So the way a woman can protect herself or work towards achieving her goals, especially if her goals imply a certain level of violence, is through magic, through spell casting, through being sly, through weaponizing her femininity. So it's very refreshing to see a story where a woman trespasses the threshold between the feminine world and the male field. She also does that while being completely human. Atalanta doesn't have divine blood in her veins. She's not a goddess, she's not a demi-goddess. Her father, her parents are not even renowned heroes. My main two complaints about this book are pacing, or rather the complete lack thereof, and mischaracterization, by which I mean that the characters act in misalignment with their own backstories. So we open with our main character, Atalanta, reminiscing about how when she was born, her father, the king of whatever island she came from, left her on the mountainside because she was a girl and not a boy, not a hare. Someone should have told that man that the sex of the child depends on the father rather than the mother, so he could have hurled himself off the cliff and spare everybody the misery. But nobody did, because that's ancient Greece and no one knew about genetics, unfortunately. Anyways, Atalanta ends up spending the first year or two of her life under the care of this mother bear, growing with her cubs. And all that happens to take place in one of Artemis's sacred groves. If you don't know who Artemis is, she's the goddess of hunt, of moon, and of virgins. Artemis finds her and takes her in her sacred grove, where she lives alongside her many nymphs. They hunt together, they spend time together. The nymphs teach Atalanta to speak, to walk, they teach her the difference between edible berries and poisonous ones, and basically they care for her until she is old enough to hunt. That's when Artemis teaches her the basis of hunting, and soon enough, as she grows, Atalanta becomes bigger, stronger, taller, more resistant, and better suited for hunting and for physical exercise, as most of her other nymphs do. She becomes one of Artemis's favorite followers. The main rule that Artemis imposes upon her nymphs is that they are not to have any sexual intercourse with men, preferably no contact whatsoever, but definitely not a sexual type. This is the core and the basis of Atalanta's education. The other nymphs teach her stuff about the other gods, Zeus and Hera and Poseidon and everybody else. They tell her stories about the Olympians, the Titans. She learns, for instance, that Zeus cheats regularly on his wife, and that bears terrible consequences for the women that he does this with, because obviously Hera cannot rage out at her divine husband, so she punishes his mistresses instead. She learns, for instance, about Persephone and how Artemis was very upset when Persephone was abducted to the underworld, because they swore, both of them, that they would live as maidens, and then Persephone was abducted, and that left Artemis alone, and that meant that Persephone had she was forcefully made to break her oath. Atalanta also learns about the beef that Artemis has with Aphrodite, because all of Artemis's followers also kind of escape Aphrodite's domain of influence, because since they don't mingle with men, that means that they don't feel sexual desire towards men, and that means that Aphrodite cannot manipulate them and cannot express her power over them, and how Aphrodite always finds way to spite Artemis and to commit, well, basically sacrilegious acts of sexual pleasure in her sacred forests, and how Artemis gets back at Aphrodite by killing her lovers. This is going to be very important in the later part of the book. She's probably in her late teens or early 20s when she's swimming with her fellow nymphs in a stream somewhere in the forest, and then suddenly a male figure made of water springs from the stream and grabs one of her fellow nymph friends. The nymph friend runs away, but the watery figure throws themselves upon the nymph, and in a second Artemis is there. Artemis banishes away the water figure, who is revealed to be the lesser god. He's basically the patron god of the particular stream where the nymphs were having a bath. So an assault has happened. It's not graphic, it's not on page, but we are to understand that the assault has actually taken place, that Artemis was a couple of seconds too late. What she does is she transforms this nymph girl who was assaulted by the river god into a stream that is to carry the waters to a distant island somewhere in a beautiful paradisical space, and to not be touched by a man ever again. And Atalanta is slightly shocked, because that doesn't look like salvation, that looks like a form of punishment. She asks Artemis, well, maybe she didn't, the nymph girl, maybe she didn't want to be a river, maybe she wanted to live her happy life here with us, and Artemis says then she should have run faster. So it's made abundantly clear that regardless of whether you are consenting to a relationship or not, if you're slow enough and if a man catches you and performs any sort of sexual activity with you, you will get punished. Some time passes by. She decides to leave on her own, separated from the other nymphs. She finds a cave somewhere deeper in the forest. She hunts, she provides for herself, she hunts alongside Artemis. She's still one of her favorites, but she doesn't leave with the whole rest of the nymphs. She just comes to visit them sometimes because now she has this need and urge for privacy. One stormy night, when the rain is raging and there's lightning and the weather is terrible, as far as I understand, one of her closest friends, a nymph named Calypso, stumbles upon her cave. Calypso looks very distressed. Her dress is torn, she's muddied, she's scared, she keeps looking behind her shoulder. Atalanta asks her, what the hell happened? Why are you so frightened? Who did this to you? Like, who frightened you so? And Callisto confesses that she found Artemis in the forest, and Artemis led her away to find shelter from the rain. And when they found said shelter, Artemis started making sexual advances towards her, and then she revealed herself to not be Artemis but Zeus, who took Artemis's form to deceive Callisto and basically to have sex with her because he felt attracted to her. So now Callisto has been lied to and has been manipulated into a sexual intercourse with a man, which is a big no-no, the biggest no-no in this society. She feels scared, she feels distraught, and she begs Atalanta not to tell anyone. And since Atalanta is a decent girl and a good friend, that's exactly what she does. She keeps her promise and she never tells anyone. Callisto leaves her cave the next day, everything returns to normal, they keep living the same way they lived before, until Calypso starts developing very visible physical signs of pregnancy. The nymphs gather at the stream once again, and Artemis looks at Callisto and she sees that her belly is kind of big. It's very obvious that she is with child, and consequently that means that she must have been with a man. Artemis asks her what happened in a very stern voice, and Calypso tells her the story. And although the story is very tragic and obviously it's not her fault in any possible way, Artemis gets angry with her and transforms her into a bear, a pregnant she-bear, and then sends her off to the wilderness. Now that event shakes Atalanta badly because Calypso was her dear friend.
It's Callisto. I keep saying Calypso, but it's actually Callisto.
And while she reveres Artemis and she adores Artemis and whatever Artemis says is law, she also feels like that's not necessarily entirely fair towards the girl who did nothing to warrant this, who never wanted this sexual intercourse, who was actually abused and raped, and had to bear the consequences of someone else's malicious intent. Time passes by, she grows stronger and faster, and one night actually, she's going through the woods and there's a fire. She stumbles upon two drunk centaurs. Centaurs are half horses, half men. They're brutes, they're terrible creatures that nymphs should definitely stay away from because they do not shy from violence whatsoever. They see a beautiful woman, they're both drunk. What's their first initial reaction? Obviously to assault her. One of them gets hit by a man, a guy who got lost in the woods. He's protecting her without even knowing who she is because he sees that those two centaurs have cornered her, and that gives her the necessary time to use her bow and to kill both of those centaurs because obviously she's a very skilled warrior, she's an archer, she's really good at this. So the guy distracts the centaurs and then she kills the centaurs, therefore saving the guy because clearly he is way weaker than both of those centaurs. She asks him for his name and he says that his name is Hippomenes. This is also very important. Hippomenes scutters off to the nearest village. She debates whether she should let him go or not, but he saved her life and he's been nice to her, so she lets him go. Now, up to this point, this is the only instance where she has had any sort of positive interaction with a man. All of her previous experience amounts to the fact that men are dangerous, men see women as objects to satisfy their own pleasures, men are to be avoided, not to be trusted, and the only thing they want from you is your body. The two gods that have assaulted her female friends, her nymph friends, the two centaurs who have just now cornered her, her own father who disregarded her and left her to die because she was not of the gender that he wanted her to be, this and the constant brainwashing from Artemis and the nymphs that she should stay away from men. Her only positive experience is this one interaction with the boy Hippomenes, who saves her from the centaurs, or who helps her with the centaurs and then gets lost looking for his village. Literally, after a 7 to 10 minute conversation, this is the only time where she has had a positive interaction with a man. She is found by Artemis, who's very proud of her. She says, "Wow, you slayed 2 centaurs. That is great, my follower, my beautiful Atalanta. I am very proud of you." And then Artemis tells her, "Hey, Atalanta, so there's this major quest, a journey that certain men somewhere on a distant island are preparing for, unheard of, almost impossible to accomplish. But each of these men has the favor and the personal patronage of some god, and some of them are children of gods, and some of them are just favored by gods. And I choose you, dear Atalanta, to be my representative. You are to be my champion. You are to bring glory to me. They are all men, obviously, and you are the only woman, but worry not, I will protect you, and I will give you a chance to prove yourself, to prove your loyalty, and to prove your skills that I have taught you." Atalanta is taken back a little bit, because that means that she'd have to travel with 50 men, and mind you, she was warned against mingling with men all her life. But on the other hand, she's very flattered that out of all the heroes who bear the name of Artemis and who do and perform wonderful acts in her name, Artemis has chosen her specifically to represent her in this wonderful quest. Atalanta is ambitious, bringing glory to Artemis and subsequently bringing glory to herself, improving herself just as good as any other male hero could be, is an appealing thought to her. She is nurtured by this ambition. Before abandoning her to her own means, Artemis gives her her final warning. She says 2 things. First of all, that Atalanta is obviously not to wed any of the men and to stay away from all of those men. And the second one is that there's a prophecy about Atalanta which was uttered when she was still a child, which says that if she ever marries, that would be her downfall. That would be the end of her. So with that instruction, Artemis transports Atalanta to the island where the famed hero of Greece band together to embark on this quest, and then scutters off and leaves her alone. The ship in question is obviously the Argo. The band of heroes embarking on it are the Argonauts. I'm sure you have heard about them before, and if you've not, then here's a brief explanation. Meet Jason. Jason is a prince. He's supposed to inherit a kingdom that currently is ruled over by his uncle. His uncle obviously doesn't want to give up the throne, and he said, "Jason, I will consider you worthy of this place, and I will consider you worthy of ruling over this kingdom if you go on this perilous and probably suicidal quest to bring the Golden Fleece from the distant island of Colchis that is ruled by a very dangerous and sadistical king. As soon as you return with the fleece, I will gladly step back and I will gladly give you your throne that is actually your birthright. How about that?" Jason is young, he wants his kingdom, obviously. That's exactly what he does. He summons all the most renowned heroes, the people who bards already sing songs about, those who children want to be like when they grow up. So legends. He summons them together. Each of them is the champion of a certain god. Some gods have multiple champions upon the ship, and this is exactly where Atalanta is headed. She's headed to the beach where the crew for the ship assembles right before the departure of the ship. While in the forest, where she was dropped off by Artemis, Atalanta sees a deer, and she's a hunter. She pursues the deer and shoots the deer, and when she does that, a man emerges from the forest and tells her, "That was actually my prey, but nice shot. I respect you for how fast you were and how good your eye is. What's your name?" She says, "My name is Atalanta. What's your name?" He says, "My name is Meleager." Meleager tells her, "Look, I'm gonna vouch for you in front of Jason and the other Argonauts. I'm also on the list. I'm also going on this journey because I have to prove myself. I come from a small kingdom. My father, well, he wants me to accomplish heroic acts, and that will give you more credentials because, you know, you're a woman, they're all men. It might not go well necessarily if you go there and you don't have anyone to stand by you and to recommend you to Jason." She likes this man in a platonic way immediately because he's nice, because he doesn't show off in front of her, and because he's okay with the fact that she's faster than him and that she is a better hunter than him. He doesn't take this as an offense as a lot of misogynistic men in ancient Greece would. He jokes about this, but in a friendly way, not in an offensive way. So she likes that about him and she trusts him. Obviously, the men start arguing with Meleager and telling him that there's no place for a woman amongst them. Some of them say that that's because it would make fools out of them. Like, what kind of expedition is this if you allow women, gods forbid, on board? And the others say that it's simply not safe for her because they'll be at sea for multiple months and they are all men and she's the only woman, and it's not necessarily a safe situation for her to find herself at. But together with Miliager, they find a way to convince Jason and the other heroes to allow her on board. Heracles, I suppose, is the one who says, "Hey, Miliager, you like this girl, so you're only welcoming this girl on board because you think that will give you a chance to court her and get certain, well, favoritism from her. And what does that say about you? A slave girl," he says, "is one thing, but this, and mind you, Miliager, you have a wife back at home." So from the start, from the very first day that Atalanta meets Miliager, she learns that there's a wife who waits for him back at home. He might have children, for God's sake. He's a married man. This is very much the same situation that Zeus is in. Remember how she learned stories about Zeus being a unloyal, disrespectful husband, and how she was indignated by those stories? This is going to be important. They embark on the ship, and then they start hopping from island to island, pursuing this dream of the Golden Fleece. Now, remember how I said one of the main problems that I had with this book is pacing? I'm going to illustrate exactly what I mean right now. This is page 136 of 353. There has been this giant build-up that this is going to be the most unbelievable, unquestionably epic and legendary journey that is going to change your characters forever, and it's either going to make gilded legends out of them or that is gonna give them a gruesome and terrible death. A lot of preparations for something that supposedly should be the main plot point of the book, something that supposedly the book should be about, and then we get to page 136, and they have just now left the very first island that they arrived to within their journey. They have sailed off, and then they arrive to an island where they decide to stop and rest for a little bit to replenish their resources. They are greeted by women who come to the beach and invite them cordially to join them to feast on the island. Jason is persuaded by the women, and most of the other heroes are also like, "Oh, women, we want to spend time with." So off they go to the palace. This whole situation, this whole island stop is very much irrelevant to the rest of the story, so I'm going to be very brief. But basically, what happens then is that Atalanta encounters in the woods the queen of this island, and the queen tells her that as a consequence of a very specific, gruesome situation that happened on the island, all men have been, well, basically killed by the women. There's a good reason why they did that, but I'm not going to get into detail. And now they're looking for new men because, well, they need children, they need offspring. So the queen of the island tells Atalanta, getting the fleece is impossible. Everybody knows that this is not a quest that can ever be accomplished by any mortal man. You're just all gonna die. Why not stay here? Why not join our community? Why not have babies with us? Why not let Jason become crowned king of this island? I, as the queen, will happily allow him to step in my position and become the ruler. Atalanta is very angry at this because in her mind she's very set on the goal. The only thing that she wants, the only thing that she can think about is retrieving the fleece and thus making Artemis proud. Being worthy of Artemis's praise, making Artemis admire her, is her ultimate goal that defines her every action. This is why she's here, and this is why, in her opinion, everybody should be here. Why are all these men being distracted by women and feasting and drinking when we actually have a goal and there's a final destination that we have to reach and we are not getting any closer? So she and the remaining heroes who did not join the others in having fun and partying, they decide to press Jason on hurrying up. And the next morning, to the chagrin of the women of the island and most of the fellow Argonauts, everybody assembles at the beach and embarks on the ship and sails off to actually pursue their adventure. This is obviously the last we ever see these women. Nobody even remembers them except for Atalanta as the story progresses. This is literally a third of the book. They have not yet encountered any real danger, any perilous situations. The way the rest of the story is paced has left me very frustrated, and let me explain why. And the continuation of the journey is literally hopping from island to island, some of which are populated and some of which are not. On certain islands, the Argonauts kinda experience challenges and they have to fight enemies and they have to make tough decisions on how they choose to continue their journey and whether they can choose to continue their journey at all. The way they resolve this challenge in this epic journey that was supposed to be the main point of the book, normally It gets resolved in this manner. Page 160. Our very first encounter with actual real enemies that demand a battle. So, as always, they sail to yet another island. As they leave the island, the giant stone creatures, like stone giants that populate this island, find them and decide to exterminate them. As it was, we made it all the way back to the Argo the next morning without encountering any giants. But somewhere up in the hills, they must have spotted us, and as we heaved on the oars to row away, the first of the boulders struck us. It smashed through one of the wooden benches in the center of the deck. The impact sudden and violent, making all of us leap to our feet. At first I couldn't see them at all. They looked like parts of the mountain itself, like grey branching trees sprouting from its rocky face. A rain of boulders came hurtling down upon us, most of them crashing into the sea, sending huge sprays of foaming water over us. The salt water blinded me, my eyes stinging, and the ship lurched. My words to Miliager seemed foolhardy now, but I swung my bow around and, blinking furiously, took aim. My first arrow struck one of them right in the chest. He swayed and toppled, the crash of his landing reverberating through the ground, sending a flurry of smaller rocks tumbling after him. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Heracles hurling a spear, and I kept firing arrow after arrow. The Argonauts fell into order, the idle conversation of minutes before forgotten, as together we focused on bringing the giant down. When the boulder hit it, the ship tilted, and I caught sight of the boiling green depths of the sea. I steadied my aim. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Zetus take to the air, the little wings at his ankles beating frantically as he hovered, throwing a spear with incredible precision. I made myself look away, not letting the impossible sight of him suspended above us distracting me. Miliager was hollering as our hail of missiles overcame the giants, and they fell, their heavy bodies tumbling down the slopes, rolling into the sea. When the last of them had toppled, I took a long breath. That's all. That's the whole battle scene. The very first actual encounter with danger, the very first actual encounter with enemies, the promise of the dangers of the journey actually being fulfilled. It took us. This is where the scene starts, and this is where it ends. And every single action scene where the stakes were actually high, where some of the characters could die, and some of them did die. Normally, in a sentence or two, they were gone. Is written like this. One of the most memorable, unfortunately for all the wrong reasons, scenes of this book was when they had to sail through these two big mountains, these two big cliffs that clash. There was no way of telling when the movement of the rocks would start. So when you sail through the rocks, you are kinda at risk at getting smashed at any given moment, and you cannot tell in advance when that moment would come. They are given by a very sage old man, as always. They are given a dove. As soon as the dove takes flight, the whole ship should follow the dove, because the dove understands when it is safest to go through the narrow passage, and so if they follow it, the whole ship, if it follows the bird, then they will save themselves. They follow through, and just, of course, obviously, as soon as they're through, the rocks clash behind them. So had they been a second later, they would have been smashed. This whole scene that, again, there's a lot of build up to. They talk about how dangerous this part of their journey will be, and they are warned in advance by this old blind sage man. Takes less than a page. There's a chapter where two characters die consequently, one right after the other. The first one gets killed by a boar during a hunting accident, and the second one dies of a sickness. Within a paragraph and a half, we are told, out of the blue, like suddenly, there's no build up to that whatsoever, we are told that the character is sick and will probably not make it out alive, and then within the same paragraph, the character dies. That's all. They bury him on yet another island that they sailed to, and then no one ever speaks about this character again. Like, they disappear from the memory of the Argonauts. Long story short, actually short story short, they arrive to Colchis with the help of this tyrannical, sadistical king's relatives who all loathe him and hate him. They manage to retrieve the fleece, and then they flee, because the king has obviously discovered that the fleece was taken, and he sends his ships, his whole fleet, he sends it after Jason and the Argonauts. There's this girl named Medea. She's the daughter of this king. She sees Jason as her salvation, basically, because her father is a big threat not only to his subjects but to his own family. She sees Jason as her only chance to escape Colchis, so she helps him retrieve the fleece because she is a very powerful witch. She says that she will help him if he then lets her escape with them and run away on the Argo to which he agrees. What happens after that is that Jason and Medea kill Medea's brother, who has been sent after them. There's this succession of events happening one right after the other that are narrated to us. Atalanta cosplays as a news reporter who has a 2 minute time frame on prime time, and she has to cram as many events in her report as possible. Then we went there, and then we left the island, and then they got married, and then I got angry with Medea because she's so stupid. So, you might ask, if so little space is allocated to the actual plot and the actual story, then what exactly is happening on that whole multitude of pages? The rest of the journey, the epic voyage, is dedicated to Atalanta feeling feelings for Meleagris, denying the fact that she feels feelings, and fucking him in every single cave she finds on every single island. This girl, who was raised in a cult, because that's literally the cult of Artemis, this girl who has only seen betrayal and aggression and violence and exploitation from all the men that she has encountered minus one minor interaction, this girl who has spent months by this point on a ship where 90% of her crewmates detest her for being a woman, and the remaining 10% don't give a fuck about anything in their life whatsoever, which includes her as well. This girl spends all but a month, maybe, with this man. Meleager is not the only one who's nice to her. There's also Orpheus, there are also other heroes who gradually become more and more friendly towards her because they see that, well, she's not only a woman, but who would have thought a person, and she actually deserves her place on that ship because she's very useful in battle. And somehow, this girl disregards everything that she's been taught, everything that has been ingrained in her brain since she was a kid, throws her respect and her admiration of her goddess out of the window, whose sole motivation to embark on this journey was to bring glory and pride to her goddess and to deserve her praise. She lusts after this man. At a certain point, he finds her in a cave in a forest and it rains, so it's very reminiscent of that night when Callisto stumbled upon her cave very distressed after being raped by Zeus. By Zeus, yes. So Meleager finds her and she lets him inside the cave and they have sex. And you know what's the most unrealistic part about this? The next morning, she feels no remorse whatsoever. She's not even afraid. She's like, well, probably Artemis doesn't see me because, I mean, I'm still alive and I'm still human. I'm not transformed into anything. I hope that Artemis will never learn about this. And yeah, how about we fuck again, Meleager? Ask any girlie who was raised in an environment where sex was a big no-no. This is not realistic behavior. Do you know what happens when a girl that has been raised in a cult that forbids any kind of sexual behavior and any kind of sexual interest in men? Do you know how that girl behaves once she leaves the cultish area and she meets a man and she actually experiences for the first time in her life any sort of sexual attraction towards that man? Do you know what she feels? Guilt. She experiences shame. She is ashamed of herself. Now, granted, if the girl hates this cult, if she really wants to prove to herself and to her former authorities, who are not authorities for her anymore, chances are she's gonna engage in sexual activity with the very first man that she encounters, and she will not feel guilty about that because to her that would be a way to prove that she's above these norms and these restrictions that were set upon her, and for her this would be a way to spite those who have tried to limit her this way. But then she would feel rage. She would feel satisfaction the next morning, not just because she has had a pleasant sexual intercourse with a man, but also because she broke the rules for the first time in her life. No punishment came upon her. She was right all this time. She had the right to do that. She defied the authorities who were trying to limit her. She feels spiteful pride. She feels anger. It's either that or guilt. And Atalanta feels no spite against Artemis by this point of her story. This is like the very beginning of the journey. They have recently left the island with all the plethora of women who killed their husbands, where she felt so much anger and frustration towards her crewmates because they lingered, and instead of being focused on the journey, because she was focused on the journey, they spent their time and their attention on these women who had nothing to do with the quest. When you are singled out by a god, not just a cult member, a cult leader, by the deity that you worship themselves, when you are respected by them and loved by them, when you were chosen out of the whole multitude of followers and worshippers to basically bring glory to this deity's name, you will not only be afraid to warrant a punishment from them if you break their one single most fundamental rule. The fear of a punishment is not as strong as the fear of disappointing your deity and losing their support and losing their pride. The idea of losing their proximity and being cast away from them hurts you and fills you with existential fright. I will never in 1,000 years believe that this girl who was so obsessed with getting Artemis's approval that she would not care whatsoever about Artemis's disappointment. What I'm trying to say here is not that the act itself is so unrealistic, although to be honest it is, because there was no build up to that. There was no foreshadowing, there was no slow burn or fast burn, there was no burn at all. She felt heat when she was standing next to Meleager in a forest once. The next interaction that they have after that, she's fucking him in a cave. Without any trouble, without any emotional struggle, she has simply accepted that now sleeping with this man will be yet another integral part of this journey, and that's that. Back to the plot. The fleece is theirs. Medea has married Jason. They all together come to Jason's homeland where his uncle resides and rules over. Jason presents the golden fleece, and the uncle is obviously happy, but also kind of reluctant to give Jason the throne that belongs to him by birthright. And then Medea gets into certain shenanigans with the old man's daughters, and they kill him, and there's a whole scandal going on. Meleager tells Atalanta that number one, he loves her, and he wants to be with her, and she tells him, man, you're married actually. You go back to your wife and your kids, and I go back to my goddess. Meleager says, okay, I'm not gonna force you obviously into a relationship, but just so you know, I would have left my wife for you, and if you still refuse to foster some kind of romantic relationship with me, how about you accompany me to my homeland, the kingdom where I'm from, because there have been rumors that Artemis is angry with my father, the king, because he has disrespected her, disregarded her in some sort of rituals. He was not pious enough, he was not reverent enough, and she has set this giant, terrible boar who now brings desolation and destruction to my homeland. How about we all go to my homeland and we kill this boar, and this will be one last gorgeous act of heroism that we basically finish this whole adventure with, because Atalanta feels quite displeased in her heart that this whole journey amounted to nothing really, and actually so am I. I'm also very displeased with that. Atalanta thinks, well, we are all heroes and there was supposed to be a giant glorious battle. This ended up being Medea's victory. She tricked her father, she used sorcery and magic, and then it's not necessarily a very heroic act because it was not our accomplishment, it was Medea's. It sits wrong with Atalanta, and she really wants to bring something home and show Artemis as her own personal achievement, so she agrees to go with Meleager and to help kill the boar. They arrive. His mother and father are very happy to see him. He takes Atalanta to the outskirts of the city where the boar is raging. And of course, yet again, some of the men who are part of the hunt, some of whom are actually Meleager's uncles, and the others are either former Argonauts and some of the local men as well, they say, well, Meleager, she's a woman, she cannot join us in the hunt, and if she joins us in the hunt, she cannot partake in the spoils. The spoils being the hide of the boar. Atalanta shoots the boar and she draws the first blood, and only after her arrow pierces his hide are they able to actually kill him. So Meleager says she drew the first blood, she's the rightful owner of the hide, it should be her spoil, it should be her trophy. And the other men who did not sail with her on the ship and who have just now met her, they are indignated. His own uncles, so royal blood, members of the royal family, the brothers of his mother, they say she's a woman and she didn't kill the boar, we killed the boar. There's a big fight, they disregard his word, he is the heir of the throne, his word should be law. He's very angry and he kills them, his own uncles. And by ancient Greek standards, almost no sin is worse than spilling your own blood, killing someone who is your family member. They all come back to his father's throne room, where the news of him slaying his uncles has already arrived before them. His mother is inconsolable. There's this prophecy about Meleager that he has told Atalanta during those first formative weeks where they got to know each other better. When his mom gave birth to him, when he was still an infant in his crib, she had a dream that there was a log in the fire, and a prophetic voice told her that as soon as this log burns to ashes, her son is gonna die. So she woke up startled and frightened, and she saw that there was an actual huge log in the fireplace in her bedroom. She, frightened, quickly pulled the log out of the fire. She raised her son with this knowledge, this understanding that as long as this log is untouched and exists in its solid form, he will basically keep on living forever. So now, when her brothers are dead and her son is the one who killed them, she leaves the throne room unaccounted by anyone. Atalanta only later understands that she's not in the room anymore, and while Meleager tries to convince his father, the king, that he will seek forgiveness from the gods and that everything can be mended and that the uncles basically deserve their death, his mother, off screen, throws the log into the fire and the log burns, and Meleager, right there in front of everybody, the whole congregation in the throne room, he falls down to the floor and he burns to death. Atalanta, frightened, runs away and decides that now is the perfect time to return to the sacred grove of Artemis and just settle down there, which she, in her head, she thinks that that's exactly what she was supposed to do from the very beginning, and it was a mistake to accept Meleager's invitation to his homeland to hunt the boar. In the corpus of Greek mythology, two different, distinct versions of Atalanta's myth exist. The first one is her joining the Argonauts, being part of this whole wonderful team of heroes and legendary warriors who retrieved the Golden Fleece and brought it back to Greece from Colchis. In the other story, however, Atalanta grows alongside her father, so she's not left in the wilderness, and when she achieves a certain marriageable age, her father decides to find her a husband, and she proclaims that she would only marry the man who would be able to outrun her in an honest race. She is super fast, and every single suitor that comes looking for her hand ends up not being as fast as her and not being able to outrun her, and so her father executes every single one of them who lost this running contest, until a man appears who is so enamored by Atalanta that he really wants to be her husband, not for the sake of being the one to inherit the land of her father, not because he wants to become royal, but because he really loves her. So he prays to Aphrodite, and Aphrodite gives him golden apples that he starts throwing off the running track when they run, and Atalanta, mesmerized through Aphrodite's magic, has to stop every single time and collect the apples and then return to the running track. And this is how he manages to come first. She falls in love with him, she doesn't mind marrying him, they marry on the spot, they go into the wilderness, and then they feel a strong surge of passion for each other, and they end up consummating their marriage in an abandoned temple of the goddess Rhea. The goddess Rhea is very offended. She considers this a sacrilege, and she appears in front of them after the act, and she turns them into lions, I think, like mountain lions, and off they go, enjoying each other forever, basically. As you can see, those two stories are very different from each other, and they have no plot intersections, aside from the fact that Atalanta is a physically developed and fast and strong girl in both of these accounts. What Jennifer Saint did is she combined, or at least she tried to combine, those stories into one single narrative. Up to this point, we have been following Atalanta from the Argonauts story, from that particular legend. As she runs away from the palace where Meleager was burned to ashes because of his mother, she gradually transitions from the first narrative into the second one. As she travels back home to Arcadia, which is a long journey from where Meleager's hometown is, she starts experiencing certain symptoms. She is nauseous in the morning, her body doesn't quite feel like her body anymore, she tires easily, and by the time she reaches Arcadia, where Artemis is waiting for her, well, supposedly waiting for her, it is very clear and very obvious that she's heavily pregnant. Am I to believe that this girl, who has been traumatized by seeing her pregnant friend Callisto being transformed into a bear, was so carefree she didn't think for a second while having sex with Meleager for a long time during this whole journey that she might end up in the same situation? Okay, so you think you're smart enough to hide the fact that you have broken Artemis's most sacred rule, but how in the world are you supposed to hide a pregnancy? And mind you, it's not that she planned to wait out a while somewhere far away to see whether she's pregnant or not and to give birth to the child if she finds herself pregnant, and then return to Artemis and pretend that that never happened. That was not part of her plan. Her initial plan was to leave the Argonauts as soon as the fleece was retrieved and return to Artemis to Arcadia. So she didn't even know by that point whether she was pregnant or not at all. But she's a smart girl, right? She knows that intercourse with men leads to pregnancies. She knows that pregnancies are completely unacceptable in the cult of Artemis where she intends to return. Guess who finds her the entrance to the forest? Obviously Artemis. Artemis is very displeased. She's like, "What have you done, girl?" And Artemis tells her, "Okay, I'm not gonna kill you, and I'm not gonna turn you into anything terrible. Because you actually did what I asked you to do. You retrieved the golden fleece, and then you also hunted down the boar, so you proved yourself to be a worthy hero. I'm not gonna kill you, but obviously you cannot come back to the forest and show the nymphs your bump. That would be... that would be unfair towards the other nymphs who did what you've done, and they were punished. I wish you all the best. Yeah, well, I hope I'll never see you again." And Atalanta is left alone, and there was no transformative work done on this character for her to suddenly change her opinion on Artemis and Artemis's praise and her life choices in general so fast. So this is why I reiterate that she only accepted this quest, and she only persisted in this quest against the sneers and the jokes of all these men who surrounded her, because she wanted to gain Artemis's approval. Suddenly she's left alone without her goddess's help, heavily pregnant, not knowing what to do and where to go. She finds a hut in the woods where a old hunter with his old wife live, and they make a pact. She promises to hunt for them, to bring food to their table as long as they take care of her and of the baby when the baby is born. I really have to admit that this part of the book with the heavily pregnant Atalanta and then her giving birth, and while she's giving birth, she remembers that Artemis is known to help women who experience and encounter trouble while giving birth to their children. Artemis comes to their rescue, and part of her believes and hopes that Artemis would come, and the other part of her thinks, well, you're not necessarily in trouble. Your labor is not that difficult. It's just an ordinary process, and you don't need your goddess's help. She's not gonna even think about you. Now that felt very humane. She has a lot of trauma to work with here. Her body doesn't respond in ways in which it did before. She's stuck with these old people in this hut. She likes them, but this is not necessarily the life that she dreamed of for herself. She has to face the fact that she doesn't know how to be a good parent, that she never thought of being a parent at all, but that the kid at the same time is not responsible for her poor choices. And despite the fact that this pregnancy and this child brought significant change to her life and made her give up on many things that she really loved and made her weak and made her tied to this cabin. She is afraid deep inside that she's just as bad as her father was, while at the same time consoling herself that whether she's not the best mother, she's certainly better than her own parents because she would have never abandoned her child, and that the child deserves to have a healthy, safe childhood in ways in which she never had. This was very vulnerable, this was very heart-wrenching, really. It made me love her as a character in ways in which the rest of the book failed. Isn't it ironic that the most emotional and relatable and well-executed part of the life story of a woman who's supposed to be remembered as a great hero and as a great warrior is the part where she gets pregnant and settles down and gives birth to a child? It's lovely that she got this chance to be portrayed as an emotional and relatable and touching human being, but wouldn't it be great if the rest of her story also portrayed her as such? Anyways, we're getting to the very end of the book. One day, while hunting in the woods, when her baby is already like a couple of months, maybe a year old, she stumbles upon Hippomenes. Remember Hippomenes, the guy who saved her from the centaurs in the very first part of the book? Remember when I told you that there's this second legend about her, where a guy prays to Aphrodite, gets the golden apples and marries her? That's Hippomenes. In the original story, that's Hippomenes. He recognizes her immediately. He tells her that people talk about the Argonauts and about the whole journey, and many of them, while recounting their heroic feats, which we for some reason never saw in the book itself, but I presume that some of them happened, they leave her out completely. She gets very enraged. She's like, I was part of this expedition and I deserve to be singled out just as much as all those other men. That makes her think that maybe accomplishing a little bit more of the legendary feats would benefit her, because in that way people would not forget her, because that's what her former crewmates are trying to do. Well, some of them at least. They're trying to erase her from the story because it doesn't sit well with them that they were part of a heroic quest and a woman was part of the same quest too. Besides, Hippomenes also tells her that certain rumors of her wonderful accomplishments have reached the kingdom of her father, the king, remember, the one who abandoned her on the mountainside, and that now, having learned that his only daughter is just as talented and as strong and as worthy as any son would be, this king is now looking for her. He is ready to announce to the whole world that she is his daughter, and he is ready to name her as his heir and successor. They converse, Hippomenes and Atalanta, and they come to the conclusion that maybe that would be the best course of action for the sake of her son's future. There's not much for him to gain in this old hut with holes in the roof here in the woods, and besides, his caretakers are old people and they deserve to be rewarded for their kindness when they took Atalanta in. So she agrees to go seek her father, although she has obviously no love for him whatsoever. But for the sake of her son, she is ready to claim her birthright as his daughter and heir. What happens after that is exactly what happened in the legend. Her father announces that he will marry her off. She doesn't want to be married off. She says that she will only marry whoever outruns her. Her father says fine, but then the other competitors who were slower than you, I'm going to execute them. And that doesn't sit right with her, because on the one hand she values her freedom, but on the other hand she doesn't want those innocent men to die for the sole fact that they wanted to marry a woman. I mean, it's not a crime to want to marry someone, and it's not a crime to want to compete with other men to gain a woman's favor. She sees the first batch of them dying, being decapitated. She's very distraught. She learns eventually that some of these men are not even there because they were ambitious enough to want to outrun her, but because their fathers sent them there. Hippomenes decides to run with her in this last race, and he throws apples, as he did in the original legend, off the track. And the thing is that in the original story, he had to do this because Atalanta didn't know him. He needed Aphrodite's favor and Aphrodite's help to conquer her heart. But in this story, she already likes him a lot. She thinks about how he's the gentlest man she has ever met, how even Meleager was not as accepting, as self-sacrificing, and as sweet as this man is, and how he displays all the qualities, all the characteristics of a man that she could potentially actually love. She never loved Meleager. She had a grand old time with him, but she never loved him really. While Hippomenes is actually a possible husband that she wouldn't mind marrying at all. She feels that she's in love with him. I must say that this realization was very brusque yet again. It was very out of the blue. It was not, there was no leading up to that, and their relationship seemed like, imagine a young guy falling in love with a girl who's slightly older than him, slightly stronger than him, more brilliant than him, and he's admiring her somewhat as a fan, and she feels for him, but the way an older sister does. This is how their relationship has been portrayed for the couple of pages that we've seen them interact with each other in the book. And then suddenly, when she sees him on the running track, she's like, I could marry this guy, I love this guy, I feel a love for him that I never felt for Meleager. And I'm not trying to say that her relationship with Meleager was very built on, because it was not, but at least it had some substance and some time for them to get to know each other and to develop some kind of feelings for each other. While with Hippomenes, she has a distant memory of him back then when he shot the centaurs, when he distracted the centaurs so she could shoot them. And now they've known each other and they've been in contact for what, a month maybe? But I guess it kind of fits Atalanta's brand, feeling suddenly for men who she has barely known. The whole point of the golden apples, initially in the original story, was that they were a ploy that Hippomenes used, that was given to him by, what's her name? Oh my god, Aphrodite, to make Atalanta, despite her desire to win the race, she would be so attracted to these apples that she would stop running and pick them, like be compelled to pick them from the side of the track. In this particular story, the golden apples had no point because she already loved him and she already was set and intended to let him win the race. She was ready to marry him because spending a lifetime with him felt way more plausible to her than seeing his head roll off his shoulders. They had a conversation right before this race where they semi-confessed their feelings to each other, so he knew that she cared about him. He knew in advance that she hated the idea of men dying for the terrible sin of simply wanting to marry her. She loathed this whole situation and that she considered him a very dear friend, that she cared for him. Maybe he didn't know that she cared for him romantically, but certainly that he was dear to her. So for him to need some kind of additional boost and help from a goddess was unnecessary at all. The race is over, they are about to marry, and they decide to run away. The sole reason why Atalanta agreed to go see her father and announce that she's his daughter was to provide for her son's future. Never once does she think about her son again from this point onwards till the end of the book. As in, she does think about him, in the sense that, well, my son is probably gonna manage. She has these golden apples. They're made of solid gold. They're worth a lot. Could it possibly cross the mind of this caring mother that she could simply pick these apples and bring them to the hut where those people are raising her child and securing their future this way? So he's not going to be a prince, he's not going to inherit anything, but at the very least he's going to have this valuable object that his foster parents can sell. Mind you, they are old, they cannot hunt on their own anymore, they have no resources to provide for this kid in the long run, and she could have helped them tremendously. Does she think about this? No. She specifically and emphatically states that she runs away with Hippomenes and she leaves the apples to lie on the ground. Could it be that this was Aphrodite's revenge on Artemis for yet another of Artemis's followers who decided to remain a virgin? No, because Atalanta has specifically broken this rule. There was no need for Aphrodite to intervene. We are told clearly that her feelings for Hippomenes are the only real ones that she feels in her life. They run away. They get to the temple, to an abandoned temple in the wilderness. They have sex in there. They are overcome with this terrible, unyielding desire for each other. Rhea is pissed off. She turns them into lions, but it's portrayed in a way that basically she has been a wild thing her entire life, and now she's finally free from the social boundaries and from the dangers of being a woman in this unfair, misogynistic world, and she can live her free life with her lover as beasts. The end. The pacing was abysmal. We have spent so much time listening to Atalanta going back and forth in her brain on whether she loves Meleager or not, on whether she's tempted enough by his proposal to abandon his wife and live with him the happily ever after or not. She reflects on her feelings on different aspects of her life, but the reflections are very superficial and they don't leave enough time for her to observe and relate to us, since she's a narrator, what is happening around her. Following a first-person narrator is like looking through a window and observing the outside world, and Atalanta is a very foggy window. She keeps thinking time and time again about proving herself to her fellow crewmates. Every time she has some sort of physical accomplishment, like she kills an enemy or she wins a prawing contest or something like that, she thinks, this is the time where I finally have proven to everybody on the ship that I have earned my right to be here. Her relationship with the other Argonauts does not improve after this feat. She's the only one who seems to think that they have changed anything in the way her fellow crewmates perceive her. And then sometimes she remembers that she's a narrator, so she's like, oh yeah, and by the way, we've slayed some giants. Oh, and by the way, Medea told me that we need to do this and this and that. And then I told her that now she's going to depend on a man, and I found that despicable, and she told me that I don't understand anything. And then we ran away with Meleager to kill the boar. The characterization is shallow and makes no sense. Our dear Atalanta acts out in ways that completely disregard and contradict her upbringing and her backstory, and she's the most fleshed out of the other characters. There's also Orpheus, yes, the Orpheus from the myths. Every single time the man feels sad or let down, or there's tension and they're about to start a conflict or a fight, Orpheus takes his lyre and he plays beautiful music that puts everybody in a lyrical, romantical mood, and nobody fights anymore. This is his only function. Time and time again, we are told that he is a wonderful musician. Yeah, but we know that already. Chances are that the people who pick up this book already have some sort of interest and knowledge of the Greek mythology, and they know who Orpheus is, and they would be interested to see him not through the lenses of the very famous myth where he goes to the underworld to retrieve his wife and fails tragically, but to see him from the eyes, the perspective of a different character who doesn't know about his backstory, story, but unfortunately, alas, we don't get to do that. We only get to hear him sing prettily. When Atalanta embarks on the Ergo, she gives us a brief account of some of the heroes that are now her fellow crewmates. She enumerates their names and she tells us briefly that this one is the son of that particular god, and this one is the son of that particular god. It is not expected of the reader to remember their names. It is not expected of the reader to have any understanding of their personalities, because their personalities are non-existent and they are quite interchangeable, and their only traits being that this one, for instance, is the god of a wind, is the son of a wind god, therefore he can fly. This one is good at steering the wheel. In the last third of the book, we are told that there are about 50 Argonauts on board of the ship. And I was like, wait a minute, how many? Because up to this point, we have had 7, maybe 8 names tossed around, no mention of the other man whatsoever. The most irritating part is that all of these characters had so much potential. Take Heracles, for example. He's this big, rowdy man who's disrespectful not only to Atalanta but also to everybody else. He has this gorgeous, beautiful young lover named Hylas, who he has a very touching and vulnerable relationship that contrasts so much the way he treats all other people on the board of this ship. Could have done so much with their backstory, because their backstory merits to be mentioned. He killed Hylas' father, and instead of avenging his father, Hylas became his lover. So much could have been done with that. Atalanta could have had a heart-warming, short line exchange with Heracles about Hylas, about some kind of funny story that the two of them shared, about some kind of touching, lovable quirk that Hylas had, anything that could have highlighted the other side of Heracles' personality that he never displayed in his interactions with the other Argonauts, because he never saw them as friends. Or, for instance, take Jason. Meleager tells us and Atalanta that Jason is insecure in his role, in his position as the captain and basically the head of this expedition, that he feels threatened by Heracles's presence, because Heracles is objectively more famous, more skilled, and more experienced than him, and the men would rather follow Heracles. But Heracles decided that he would not lead this expedition because, well, he had other feats to accomplish, and this would have swayed him away from the journey that he already had set before him. A lot could have been done with Jason's insecurities. They were hinted at, but they were never developed. We had plenty of time during their journey to discover the personalities of the people that surrounded Atalanta, make them talk to each other. Her relationship with the other women is also very competitive and strange. She was brought up in an all-female environment. She likes girls. She was taught from early childhood that women good, man bad, women friends, men enemies, and potential threats. She has some kind of weird girl hate towards the queen of the all-female island, and while understanding why these women got rid of all of their men, at the same time she feels something personally vitriolic for their queen for no reason. That woman never did anything to her. She never hurt her. She never offended her in any way. And don't get me started on the way she treats Medea. She sees that Medea's father is a monster, that his sons, his wife, his subjects, everybody hates him. She understands, because Medea tells her clear as day that Medea did what she did, that she escaped Colchis, and that she decided to marry Jason, and that she saw Jason as her salvation because she was tired. Medea told her, I am tired. I've been fighting all my life. I've been at war with my father and with my environment. My father threatened to marry me off to some kind of sadist who would beat the hubris and the shit out of me because he said that my character was not woman-like, that I'm not humble enough. Atalanta hears that and still hates this girl. She tells her, well, you have so much potential. You're such a strong witch. Why don't you become like me, basically? Why would you ever need a marriage? You can protect yourself from any kind of danger. And Medea tells her straight away, I want a family. I want someone to love me. I want a safe space where I can not fight for my existence every single second. And Jason, well, fits very well in that position. Atalanta has been brought up in an environment where everybody supported her. She had a very strong support system with all those names and with Artemis. She understands what it's like to be surrounded by people who wish her well and who would stand up for her and protect her if something happened. She was the child that was literally raised by the proverbial village, yet still she fails to understand why Medea is tired of constantly fighting for her life, and why she's seeking peace and why she's seeking stability. Like, that goes just like beyond her head, and she keeps being a bitch towards her for no good reason for the whole one scene where they're interacting. Mind you, by this point where they have this conversation, Medea has already saved her life and Meleager's wife. During that first section of their relationship, when they just started doing stuff in caves, she thinks about Meleager's wife. She thinks, oh well, all men are allowed to go on these adventures and then fuck whoever they please. All men have bastards all over the place. I'm not doing anything that these men are not. Cheating is bad, and you know that. And you have loathed and resented men, even gods, before because they were cheaters. You know that there's a wife there somewhere. And then the only time when we actually get to see that poor woman on page is the scene where Meleager dies. Not even when they come back to his kingdom. He has a wife that has been mentioned time and time again. Is his wife part of the scene where everybody, the whole kingdom, goes out to meet the hero, the prince, the heir of the throne? Is she part of the procession? No, she's not. Plot holes, lack of continuity, lack of integrity within the characters, terrible pacing. The background characters, all the secondary characters except Atalanta and her two love interests, had no meaning, no substance, and no personality whatsoever. You could have easily swapped them and you would have not seen any difference. The events that lead to each other have no effect in the long run at all. The writing was nice, the scenery was beautiful, and Hippomenes is a sweetheart. That was my review of Atalanta. I wish you all the best, and I wish myself that my reading experiences in 2025 would not be defined and characterized by this very first book that I have read this year. Thank you very much for sticking around. See you soon.